has joined the meeting.
Hit the hand raise function. Just use the same sort of convention in the room. Just raise your hand so then the chair can acknowledge you.
You all set, ready to go? Can everybody hear us?
Yes.
Just let us know. Unfortunately. Well, I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. The VRE Operations Board meeting will now come to order. Good morning and welcome. I hope everyone is safe and well. To get started, I'll ask Rich to please review the participation instructions for the board. Go ahead, Rich.
Mr. Chair, just as a reminder to mute or unmute your microphone, only click on the microphone icon on your computer. No changes to your phone are necessary. If you wish to send a chat message to an administrator, click on the chat icon. Reminder, no public business can be conducted over the chat. Also, to raise your hand for questions or comments, open up the participant window, click the hand icon next to your name to raise your hand. The only visual component of this meeting is the presentation slides, which are being shown to those on the WebEx and the YouTube stream. These slides include photos of the main speakers. Chairman Skinner will ask for any questions and or comments after receiving a motion and a second to consider each motion. To indicate you have a question, comment, and wish to raise your hand, click again on the participant button and then on the hand icon next to your name in the participant list. Keep the participant window open, which should show up on the right side of your screen. And just as a note, Robert Hostelka will be monitoring the hand raising, and we'll let the chairman know if there are any questions. When called upon, please announce your name and to whom your question comment is directed. There will be a roll call vote for each action item. Please follow the roll call and be ready to unmute when your name is called. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rich. Does anybody have any questions about the instructions? Okay, I'll ask Leslie to go ahead and do the roll call.
Mr. Alcorn.
Here.
Ms. Bailey.
Here.
Mr. Banks.
Here.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Here. Ms. Baumke.
Here.
Crystal. Here. Ms. Franklin. Ms. Franklin. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Lawson.
Here.
Ms. Franklin, thank you. Ms. Lawson. Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Ms. Shelton.
Here. Here.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Stark.
Here.
And Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have a preliminary resolution necessary to conduct this virtual meeting. Rich will give you the board an overview of item number 3.
So this is, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is action item 3, finding the need to conduct June 19th, 2020 meeting electronically. The VRE Operations Board finds that meeting by electronic means is authorized because the nature of the current declared emergency makes it both impractical and unsafe for the operations board to assemble in a single location, and are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations in the discharge of the operations board lawful duties. And the items on today's agenda are encompassed within the continuity of operations ordinances adopted by several member localities of the VRE to assure continued operation during the disaster posed by the public health emergency resulting from COVID-19.
Do I have a motion and a second to approve resolution 3-0522, 2020, finding need to conduct the June 19th, 2020 meeting electronically?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions regarding this resolution? Would the clerk please call roll for the vote to approve resolution 3-05-20?
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Aye. Ms. Baumke,
Aye.
Ms. Crystal. Aye. Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson. Aye. Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Shelton, or Ms. Shelton.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Skinner,
Aye.
Mr. Smith, Mr. Stork,
Aye.
and Mr. Watkins.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that passes.
Thank you. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So move. Supervisor Bailey?
Okay. Thank you. Do I have any changes to the agenda? Will the clerk please call the roll for the vote on the approval of the agenda?
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Banks,
Aye.
Parker, Ms. Baumke,
Aye.
Ms. Crystal. Aye. Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson. Aye. Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Ms. Shelton,
Aye.
Mr. Skinner,
Aye.
Mr. Stork,
Aye.
Mr. Watkins.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that passes.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the May 15th meeting?
So move. Meg Bomke.
Second, Supervisor Bailey?
Mr. Walkinshaw first. Ms. Bailey second. Thank you. Are there any questions? Corrections to the minutes? Would the clerk please call the roll of the minutes from May 15th VRE Operations Board?
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Aye. Ms. Baumke,
Aye.
Ms. Crystal. Aye. Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson. Aye. Mr. McLaughlin,
Aye.
Ms. Shelton,
Aye.
Mr. Skinner,
Aye.
Mr. Stork,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
And Mr. Chairman, that passes.
Thank you. Roll into Chairman's comments. First of all, let me thank Mr. Walkinshaw and his staff for hosting this in this building for us. Very generous. We do thank you very much for you and your staff setting this up for us. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 2020 VRE Operations Board meeting. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. I want to thank our staff and everyone who keeps VRE moving during these unprecedented times. I'd also like to recognize that today is June 19th, or Juneteenth. As the governor recently said, it's time we evaluate this as not just a celebration by and for some Virginians, but one acknowledged and celebrated by all of us. And now our acting CEO, Rich Dalton, will give his report.
you, Chair Skinner. Good morning, Operations Board members and others. I too hope all of you and your families are well and remain safe. As restrictions on residents, non-essential workers, and businesses have become relaxed in the region, we have seen a slight increase in ridership. As ridership returns, the continued emphasis on social distancing, the wearing of face coverings, hand hygiene, disinfecting trains and facilities remain key. Our facilities and mechanical operations team have been installing signage and other visual cues at station platforms and onboard trains to enhance our ability to manage social distancing. Concurrently, hand sanitizer dispensers are being installed on board trains and at stations. These efforts should be completed by the end of this month. Since face coverings were mandated by the Governor's Executive Order 63 on May 26th, we have seen almost 100% daily compliance. The exceptions identified in the executive order are currently managed through the adherence to social distancing on board. This past week, we implemented our enhanced cleaning procedures for onboard trains. These enhanced processes provide a thorough cleaning and disinfecting solution that will likely become the new norm for us. As ridership continues to return, we are prepared to lengthen current train concests and add trains ahead of the demand. Most importantly, all of these activities continue safely. Combined, approximately 200 personnel per day are working to ensure a safe and healthy commute. And today, once again, I have no positive COVID-19 results to report. Just touch a little bit on ridership. We are currently operating a reduced service level or an S schedule. Overall ridership is still down in that 95% range compared to the same period last year. Since the phase 1 and phase 2 reopening, we have seen an increase in ridership on a week-over-week basis. As for on-time performance, as you can see for the month of May, the Manassas line and the Fredericksburg line both were over 90%. Or a system-wide average of 93%. And again, I will just draw folks' attention to this same period last year in May where we were implementing positive train control. So this is indicative of a tremendous increase from a year-over-year perspective. Next. I did want to touch again on our financial position. I provided you this update last week that reflects estimated revenue and expenses through the end of May. As noted, fare revenue projections for May was slightly higher than projected at the end of April. We are projecting a net deficit from operations for the fiscal year 2020, ending at the end of this month, of approximately $1.7 million. This is before we add a $1.1 million of emergency grant funding we received in early April from DRPT, and of course the additional relief from the CARES Act. Combined, these two sources will likely ensure we end the fiscal year balanced without a net deficit from operations. We continue to scenario plan for FY 2021. As noted last month, as we enter a new fiscal year on July 1st, we anticipate revenue and ridership to be well below previously budgeted levels. We are likely not to see ridership revenue return to previously anticipated levels until possibly at the end of the fiscal year. As we transition into FY 2021 at the end of this month, I will continue to prepare monthly updates for review with the Operations Board, similar format that we used here in 2020. As we welcome back our riders, I want to thank our staff, onboard train crews, transportation managers, the facilities and mechanical operations team, and others for their efforts towards planning and executing the additional safety and health measures. Their tireless efforts have not gone unnoticed and are aimed at providing a safe and healthy return of our riders. Finally, I want to thank our loyal riders who have endured this unprecedented time with us and look forward to seeing many of you back as back on VRE trains soon. That's the end of my report. Mr.
Does
Chair,
anybody-
if you have any questions.
Yeah, does anybody have a question for Mr. Dalton? Yes, sir. This is, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Don, I was surprised at the ratio of operating revenue expenses, basically meeting operating ratio, in other words, meeting the goal. It's pretty remarkable given the collapse, if you will, in passenger ridership. So, any particular comments on that?
Just, going back to about the April timeframe when we initially, again, we've been doing a lot of scenario planning, and within that planning, we have projected obviously lower fare revenues, and they've come, and the actual fare revenues have come in slightly higher. But honestly, the other part of the scenario equation was simply on the expense side. We really needed to not only pull back on discretionary expenses, but also because we are running a reduced service, we have just the variable expenses go down as well. I mean, fuel costs and some of the other variable costs. So, and if you go back even pre-COVID, we were slightly up on fare revenue and slightly down on expenses. So those two elements have sort of converged here now, and this is where we end up.
Something to do given all you're trying to manage. So I'm impressed to try to keep those two together. So.
Absolutely, and my hat's off to the entire VRE staff. We have been focused on this and open on it, frankly. Very open on what we can do on the expense side. And of course, we just continue, even though the ridership is relatively low, we continue, as I mentioned here, trying to get the ridership back.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Dalton? Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Denise.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rich, what is the average daily ridership as far as the number?
Currently,
Yes.
we currently in that 800 range. We were tipping at the high 700s at the end of last week. This week we started even higher. We had a day. We thought we were going to start seeing 1,000 here, 1,000 average daily riders, but yesterday and even slightly the day before, the ridership ticked down. So I'm going to call it about 780, almost 800 average.
In terms of the welcome back plans, can you kind of just walk us through the process and protocols, or how you've instructed the staff to enforce compliance with the governor's mass order for public transit? Obviously, tricky situation.
So the question is, how are we enforcing the Executive Order 63, which is the requirement to wear face coverings? The first part is we are pushing messaging. In other words, we amped up to an additional level, if you will, as it relates to putting out the advice, not just with good hand hygiene, et cetera, but when it came to the face coverings, we have pushed the messaging out. And I only mention that simply because that's the feedback that we've received, is because of the high compliance. We remind everybody every morning via text at the stations that you must wear a face covering. I believe the other element of that is, and again, the only non-compliance, and you can't even characterize it as non-compliance, because the only piece that we see now are those that can take that exception. The other part is frankly, even at this level, I think folks get it. Folks get that in order to be in the public transportation environment, specifically with VRE, it's, even though we can provide social distancing on board the train, you sort of get that it is somewhat of a confined space, and that is it's an additional layer of protection for them. So far that's so good. We obviously, the challenge for us is going to be moving forward as more ridership returns. So
Anybody else? I have one question for you. In your brief, you said, looks like the regular thing's gonna be the new cleaning. Well, let me ask you, if we continue to do this, what type of cost, increasing cost is that gonna cost us? Compared to what we used to clean, and now we're doing it twice a day? Is there an impact to it, or is it minimal?
So the question is, as we have implemented this enhanced cleaning process, and I made the comment that this, in my report, that this could become the new norm, what the incremental cost would be. Just to explain a little bit about what this process is. This process, basically, it has three major elements: water, salt, and electricity. And the biggest upfront cost, if you will, was and we'll get to it here in a little bit, because it's actually an item on our spending report, but the upfront cost for the equipment to do that was the largest expense. So then it's just water and then it's salt. But again, I'll get back to answer your question. So what happens there is then it goes through an electrolyzed process, and then we take that chemical and we take that and we effectively spray that on the trains. It is likely not to be any worse than cost neutral. What I do project is that it will be slightly more cost effective, because the element to that is that we are no longer having to ship cleaning supplies in and out of our facility. In other words, this method produces the disinfectants right on site. So if it's marginal, it's because of the shipping. But I will take that as an action item, Chair Skinner, and get back to you in a couple of months, because the other cost driver to this is the application process, and we are still working through the exact, just the sequencing and exactly how we want to do this on a nightly basis on the labor side or the application side. Again, I will get back to you in a couple of months with a more specific answer.
And
Just two follow-up questions on points that were just made. One, going back to the ridership issue, I know this is a tough question to ask, but I'm assuming it's being considered. Telecommuting is becoming such a big thing right now, and everybody is talking about how that's going to impact in the future. How many people are just going to stay home? When do you think we're going to have some idea of what impact that's going to have? Or is there any chance anytime soon to start having that conversation of that impact on ridership in the future?
So the question is, what is likely to be the impact of telecommuting in the near term or even in the long term? From my perspective, and we do discuss this amongst our continuity of operations team and others, is don't think we'll have a clear vision on that, if you will, even by the end of this year, frankly. I think once we get closer to the ultimate vaccine, if you will, and sort of the dust settles there, I think that's actually when we'll have a little bit better visibility. Frankly, because as we continue to progress through this, we are going to see continuation of teleworking and continuation of an emphasis to stay home. And frankly, we anticipate that happening, at least right now, through the end of this year, if not at the beginning of the next calendar year. So that's, again, my long way of saying we don't know yet. Frankly,
but we are looking at it.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. We have it right in front of us.
Just wanted to add that the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, we have our staff trying to work on a lot of this. I'd be happy to, on behalf of the commission or whatever, they come up with
I'm sorry, we can't hear the question on the phone.
When you speak-
got it. Okay, sorry about that. I was speaking from behind a mask. I was just noting, this is Katie Crystal, I was just noting that the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission staff is trying to work on some of this modeling and participate in some regional consortia that are studying this issue. So as we have anything, I'd be happy to bring that forward to VRE too. But I think the upshot is exactly the one Mr. Dalton gave about being very hard to model out. I think one of the big factors that will determine what teleworking looks like in the fall, as well as whether our schools reopen and how. Because without a full reopening of schools, which I think at this point is looking unlikely, you're going to see a lot of pressure on employers to continue to work.
And last follow-up question, going back to masks on trains. With the governor's order, and I think as localities dealing with it, there is the order, and then there's the issue of enforcing the order and how far we can go in enforcing it. I would assume that our only option would potentially be to refuse. They basically ask the person to leave the train. Would we, in fact, do that if it came down to it?
We have been, obviously, we have discussed this, and we have actually, guidance for our onboard train crews. It's somewhat of a layered approach, because the approach we prefer to take, obviously, is compliance. And what we will do, in fact, the next step in this will ensure, and only because we just got a supply of additional face coverings in, but we will ensure our onboard train crews have a limited supply. And again, this is not meant to provide face coverings for all of our passengers, but just have a limited supply. Therefore, if somebody just simply forgets, you can hand them a face cover. And frankly, that is, if it's not because of the exemption of the executive order, that's typically the case right now. So if we then get into a situation whereby a person does not want to wear a face covering and claims a medical exemption, for example, that's fine too. We are going to manage that through social distancing on the train. We will also, at least at this point, manage that through social distancing if somebody's refusing to wear a face mask, so long as they don't become disruptive. As long as we can manage the social distancing aspect. And I only say that because as ridership returns, and this gets even a little more complicated, to your point, Mr. Kelly, that's something that will have to be visited, because frankly, we don't, the enforcement piece of it from a denying boarding, there's really no teeth in the executive order or anywhere else to do that. My optimistic look at it is simply, we're going to provide several different layers to manage that. And if it becomes an issue that we can't even provide a seat for somebody from a social distancing standpoint, then yeah, that it may end up that we have to ask somebody to either get off the train. I'm very optimistic that we will.
I just want to make sure it's clear to the riders too that these are the steps we're taking, and this is we do have the option to refuse service. Do we have that legal authority?
It's
or is that questionable?
It's questionable.
Good. Next one, item 8, is the VRE riders and public comments. The public comments for this meeting are being taken electronically. Members of the public need to visit VRE.org for the link to the public comment form. The link will remain open throughout the meeting, and the clerk will read all public comments at the end of the meeting. Moving to action 9. Action 9A, authorization to execute a contract for seat bottoms for the passenger rail cars. Rich, give us an overview, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the recommendation here is we're seeking authorization from the operations board to authorize the acting chief executive officer to execute a contract with Felfab Corporation of Atlanta, Georgia, for seat bottoms for passenger rail cars in the amount of $1,072,675, plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $1,179,943. This action is a result of a solicitation as part of our overall life cycle maintenance strategy for VRE rolling stock. the passenger rail car seat bottoms on 71 of the 100 total cars is reaching the end of their useful life. Therefore, it is required that we replace those seat bottoms. So by executing or authorizing this contract, we can put an NTP to the purchase and start that process.
I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution.
Mr. Chair, move approval of the resolution for the purchase order.
Supervisor Bailey, second.
Do I have any questions about or comments about the motion? No, let's call the roll, please.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Ms. Bomke,
Aye.
Ms. Crystal,
Aye.
Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Ms. Shelton,
Aye.
Chairman Skinner,
Aye.
Mr. Stork,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that motion passes.
Thank you. Action item 9B, authorization to execute a sole source for central diagnostic cloud services for VRE locomotives. Rich, please give us an overview.
Yeah, the VRE Operations Board is being asked to authorize the acting chief executive officer to execute a sole source contract with Wabtec Railway Electronics of Germantown, Maryland for central diagnostics cloud services for VRE locomotives for a term of 3 years in the amount of $406,221 plus 10% contingency for a total amount not to exceed $446,843. The Central Diagnostic System, or CDS, is a fully integrated health monitoring system. The system provides oil pressures, water temperatures, traction and head-end power, and other data to assess the health of the locomotives and provide alerts and other information. The system was provided when the locomotives were originally delivered to us in 2010 and 2011. For the first 5 years after delivery, the cost for the interactive services were part of the sale of the locomotive. Since that time, we have continued to pay for the services through additional service contracts as the system continues to provide value-added information.
Do I have a motion? 9B.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second. Are there any questions about this motion? Would you please call the roll?
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker, Ms. Bomke,
Aye.
Crystal,
Aye.
Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin, Ms. Shelton,
Aye.
Chairman Skinner,
Aye.
Mr. Stork,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that motion
Action item 9C, authorization to amend the maintenance service for VRE facilities task order for on-call services. Rich, please give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The VRE Operations Board is asked to authorize the acting CEO to amend the current task order for on-call services was executed with NVE Inc. under the maintenance services for VRE facilities contract in the amount of $300,000 plus a 5% contingency for a total of $315,000. This will increase the total authorization for this task order from $698,250 to a total amount not to exceed $1,013,250. This amendment to the on-call services task order will allow the unscheduled repair and inspection services for our rail stations, offices, maintenance and storage facilities to continue.
Thank you, Rich. May I have a motion and a second for this action item 9C?
So move, Supervisor Bailey. Second, Supervisor Shelton.
Thank you. Are there any questions? If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey, Mr. Banks?
Aye.
Ms. Parker? Ms. Bonke?
Aye.
Ms. Crystal?
Aye.
Ms. Franklin?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Ms. Shelton?
Aye.
Chairman Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Stork?
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, this motion.
Thank you. Item action 9D, authorization to execute a contract for the Enterprise Resource Planning Software Solution and Technology Services. Rich, please run over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The VRE Operations Board is asked to authorize the acting CEO to execute a contract with Tyler Technologies, Inc. of Plano, Texas, for the purchase and implementation of an enterprise resource planning software solution and technology services in the amount of $1,450,320 plus a 20% contingency for the total amount not to exceed $1,740,384. In summary, we currently utilize multiple non-integrated software systems to manage our business functions. Gap analysis was performed to help identify opportunities for improvement of our current information systems. The consultant assisted us in defining the specifications for an RFP solution or an ERP solution to streamline current VRE systems, business processes, and organizational functions. Staff evaluated vendors and determined the integrated ERP system and associated technology services from Tyler Technologies were compliant with VRE requirements, and it's recommended that the Munis system provides the best value for us. In simple terms, we had a lot of different systems that did not integrate or do not integrate. This is a means to bring those different, not necessarily systems, but processes together under one common platform.
Do I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution 9D?
Second.
Second, Matt Kelly, thank you. Does anybody have any questions pertaining to this motion? No, please call the roll.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Bailey?
Aye.
Mr. Banks?
Aye.
Bennett Parker? Ms. Bonke?
Aye.
Ms. Crystal? Ms. Franklin?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Ms. Shelton?
Aye.
Chairman Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Stark?
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you. Action item 9, Echo E, authorization to issue a task order for accounting and financial support services for enterprise resource planning implementation. Rich, please give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is somewhat of a companion product, if you will, to the previous authorization. What we're seeking here is authorizations from the VRE Operations Board to authorize the acting CEO to issue a task order with RSM US LLP for accounting and financial support services for enterprise resource planning implementation in an amount of $286,500 plus a 10% contingency for a total not to exceed $315,150. What this essentially does for us is it provides us the necessary resources to ensure that our system integration, specifically to accounting and financing, that when we migrate information, that information remains a very high level of integrity. And this task order will also help us with the ability to stand up enhanced processes and policies as it relates to the accounting and finance functions when you go into a full-blown enterprise system.
Thank you. Do I have a motion and a second for resolution 9E?
I'll move for approval, but I do have a question. This is Bonke.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I would just like to know, and if you could just educate me on, are we having some issues right now that is bringing this forward? Or is this something that's fairly routine that we would need to do? Kind of what precipitated this item being on the agenda? If you could just educate me a little.
So the question is, why is this particular item on the agenda? And there's nothing specific, nor is there a problem. This is actually part of or a companion piece to the implementation of a full enterprise system. In other words, in some respects, when you do a system integration similar to what we've proposed here, it takes a lot of resources. And of course, in the previous item, we have a technology company that's going to come in and provide a lot of those resources to us. But as it relates to the accounting and finance pieces, we want to make sure that as we transition into a new system, again, that the information has a high level of integrity. In other words, we don't lose anything. And again, it's the policies and procedures. Frankly, having done these types of integrations before, it's a very, very large process, if you will, particularly for the finance and accounting folks. And what we don't want to do is take the focus away from our current staff who are already doing finance and accounting stuff. We want to bring some experts in and help us do that migration.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I would assume that all of these contracts are written with some kind of a 6-month or 1-year time period where we make sure everything is 100% operational before funds are released. I'll just say we've had some learning lessons in Stafford. You learn from your mistakes.
Okay, I'm not.
So my question is, we won't be releasing all the funds until we know that our system is totally operational and functional.
So going back to the previous item, and to some degree, this is a companion item. This is it's ongoing. I believe it's a 5-year contract, and it's almost pay as you go. In other words, it's what service levels they give us. We pay them as they go. I think to your point, yeah, there's a reconciliation at the end, as in most contracts. And frankly, we would not necessarily let them off the hook, if you will, if they haven't completed the project. So.
Okay, all right, you've satisfied my questions. Thank you, Rich.
Any other questions? I have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey,
Aye.
Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker, Ms. Lomke,
Yes.
Ms. Crystal,
Aye.
Ms. Franklin,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson. Mr. McLaughlin. Ms. Shelton.
Aye.
Chairman Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Stork.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that motion passes.
Thank you. Action item number 9F. Authorization to execute a letter of intent regarding the design, funding, and construction of the planned VRE Crystal City Station. Rich, please give us an overview.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The VRE Operations Board is asked to give authorization to the Acting Chief Executive Officer to execute a letter of intent with JBG Smith regarding the design, funding, and construction of the planned VRE Crystal City Station. The new VRE Crystal City Station will be constructed adjacent to existing developments and on JBG Smith property. This is a non-binding letter of intent that provides a formal process for both JBG Smith, VRE, and other stakeholders to collaborate on the station design to support the broader vision that JBG Smith is pursuing in the immediate area, or the national landing area for those that are familiar with that area, while ensuring that VRE's design requirements are met. So simply put, VRE has a standard design for VRE stations. And this is an effort to collaborate together with JBG Smith. And in the event that, as we continue our collaboration, JBG Smith points out things that from a aesthetic standpoint, or just features and stuff like that, that better fit the existing environment, or even some of their more near or long-term plans, that they have the ability to work with us and incorporate those design features into this station. And of course, they would actually end up paying for those. So this non-binding letter of intent is, again, it identifies that process. We'll work together on exactly what those potential incremental design elements could be, design and construction elements. And then we will work on additional agreements that we will bring back to the operations board that actually would define those elements, both from a, in a descriptive term and from a cost perspective.
So it's a quick question here before I call the question. That expense is going to be with the JBG Smith, correct? Okay, that the design, the change of it, who pays for that?
Yes. So this, again, there's no expense to VRE for this non-binding letter of intent. We have our own design effort already ongoing. The collaboration piece, or the piece that JBG Smith brings to it right now, they are funding that themselves. This is simply just as it states, a non-binding letter of intent to collaborate. It identifies that process.
Crystal, would you like to make a
I
motion?
would, and if I have a second, I'd love to speak to it. So I move that we authorize the CEO to execute the letter of intent regarding the design station.
Have a second? Thank you.
And if I may speak to it, I just
Yes,
wanted to, in particular, thank Mr. Dalton and the staff for prioritizing this. The way the other party, JBG, has described this is they are interested in making a significant investment of their own in this station, and having this commitment from VRE lets them make the case to their internal stakeholders that they should be putting money into the design. So I'm really encouraged about this. I think it'll be an opportunity to use a term that everybody kind of hates, but leverage our investment that VRE would be making in the station anyway, and take advantage of a developer who wants to put some of their own money into the station too. I will note, I noticed they kind of smuggled in their preference to change the name of the station. So I think my colleagues and I on the Arlington County Board may have some opinions on that. Want to do a resolution at such a time when it's time to finalize the name of the station. But the idea of the additional investments or something, I'm like I said, please speak up. The idea of the additional investments over and above what we would make is something that I'm enthusiastic about. I really thank Rich for making the time to get this LOI done.
Thank you. If there's any questions, please call the roll.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Ms. Bailey. Aye. Mr. Banks,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Aye. Ms. Blumkey,
Aye.
Ms. Crystal,
Aye.
Ms. Franklin. Aye. Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Aye.
Ms. Shelton. Aye. Chairman Skinner.
All right.
Mr. Stork,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you. We now move into the spending authority report. Rich, will you please give us that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had two items in May. One was we amended a task order with VHB under a GPC, or General Planning Consulting Services contract, to increase their contract authorization to provide additional levels of real estate services for the Broadway expansion project. And the second one, as I referred to before, this is the purchase order that we made to Spraying Systems Company for the Pathos Sands systems that eventually have been installed at both of our maintenance storage facility for the electrolyzed water sanitizing systems that we discussed in my report, my comments, to enhance our cleaning and disinfecting. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Moving on, staff has prepared a presentation on VRE's coordination with the Commonwealth on the Transforming Rail in Virginia plan. Rich?
Yes, so let me tee this up. We'll have a couple other folks that will be speaking to this presentation. Our Chief Engineer, Dallas Richards, will walk us through the various slides. I just want to make this point right now that this presentation, there is seemingly a lot of information. We're going to step through it at a pace, if you will. This is not the last time you will see this. This is not the last time you will see this information. But I need to communicate to the operations board the collaboration efforts that VRE and DRPT and others have been going through as it relates to the Transforming Rail in Virginia plan, and frankly, how the enhanced, if you will, program or plan interplays with our station project. So again, I'll ask Dallas to jump on and he can start the presentation, but again, this isn't the last time you'll see it. If there's anything in this presentation that you want specific information out or whatever, again, here's an opportunity for you to be able to, you can contact me, we can set up one-on-ones, but we will be bringing this back to you simply because we are modifying, if you will, some of the station design. So before we go to it, Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. McLaughlin has his.
Not only will Rich be bringing some information back to you, but there'll be some agreements resulting from the CSX deal between the Commonwealth and VRE that we'll be briefing you on, and then after that, wanting your support.
Appreciate it.
So with that, why don't we just go ahead and get started? Go to the next slide, and Mr. Dallas Richards will walk us through this.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Rich for the opportunity to share this with you. I'm very excited to be a small part of a tremendous program that
Can you get that
overview over here. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Hey, Dallas, we're going to need you to speak just a little bit louder today.
Okay. Very good. Here we go. I offered Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Rich, thank you for the opportunity to share with this about this tremendous program I'm excited to be a small part of. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the program itself, talk about a few key elements, major differences from where we'd been before, and then we're going to look project by location from north to south, and then look at a few of the specific program benefits to the Commonwealth and VRE specifically. With that, next slide, please, Robert.
1 second, he'll be right with you.
All right. With that, just an overview of the program. It is the purchase between the Commonwealth and CSXT for the RF&P subdivision, portions thereof that serve the VRE service area. There are multiple projects within this program, some led by VRE and some led by DRPT, that are all being closely coordinated with Mike McLaughlin and his staff. It has a phased delivery with key milestone delivery dates within them. We are closely coordinating between the track projects generally led by the state and the station projects generally led by VRE. Next slide, please, Robert. With that, some of the key elements, and probably the most important, is interoperability on 3 tracks, or in some cases 4 tracks north of Alexandria, which gives us a lot of operations flexibility, capacity, if you will. There was an operations modeling analysis performed, probably one of the most comprehensive to date. It was done by all stakeholders with information from all the stakeholders, including Amtrak, CSX, VRE as operators. What this will do is will allow better recovery during service disruptions, whatever they may be, broken down trains or bridge strikes, things like that, that will give us more options for relief valves, if you will, along the corridor. And then the new third track south of Franconia, this is plans to construct a new third, basically from Franconia south, and a new fourth track from Alexandria north, that being sort of the transition zone between Franconia and Alexandria, with an overhead bypass in between. And to speak to that, I'll show you a few images in a moment, but basically think of it this way, that we will run on the east side of the corridor from Spotsylvania to Lorton, and then transition from east side to west side of the corridor between Lorton to the south and Franconia Springfield Station to the north. I'll show you a few photos of that. And in so doing, we'll also transition from a 3-track corridor to a 4-track corridor in that vicinity. The cornerstone of the program of projects is the construction of the 2-track span Long Bridge over the Potomac. Sort of that is the jewel of the crown that gets us across the Potomac and into the district. With that, Robert, if you would, next slide. So I'll focus more on the right side of this table, which is the transforming rail, less so on the system plan 2040. But what this does effectively, previously we had intermingled freight and passenger, which still be true to some degree, but this is paramount in the sense that it separates freight and passenger, but with interoperability. So that is to say, we VRE and Amtrak will predominantly run on the east side of the corridor, south of Lorton, with the transition I mentioned, and CSX and freight trains will predominantly run on the west side of the corridor. But all 3 or all 4 tracks, whichever the case may be, depending on location, remain interoperable. We can run on any of the tracks at any time, which again gives us that fluidity, flexibility, and thus increased capacity. So from a large scale, previously we had large scale platform improvements provide one side platform and center platform, which gave us 3 platform edges at all of the locations. But here in the near term, looking at this going forward, in the near term, we would continue to run with our east side platforms, lengthening where we needed them. In some cases, we do still require that for full 8-car consist. But in the long term, we would convert those side platforms when, say, the 4th track eventually came into service. Those side platforms can then be converted to center platforms, providing 2 platform edges within the predominantly passenger portions of the corridor. So then last, near-term service capacity increases achieved by lengthening some trains and adding new train sets. This is a key element to it. Once the state owns the corridor, owns the portion of the corridor that's proposed, it removes the limitation of trains per day effectively over time. And so that allows us to add trains and is not necessarily lengthening trains. We looked at using 10-car consist, keeping the same number of trains because bound by the number of trains. When that restriction goes away, it allows us to more frequent service, and which is frankly more desirable by most of our passengers. Next slide, please, Robert. As we look at these, we try to balance this between starting with operations as the foundation. There are all of these factors, whether it be environmental concerns in the immediate vicinity of the stations, and thus funding available for said projects. And then that helps us to determine, those 3 help us determine what infrastructure we can and what infrastructure we should build in both the short term and the long term. And those are some of the ones I'm going to show you here in a moment. With that, Robert, next slide, please. So I apologize for some of the graininess of these images, but I think the colored images will tell you the story at the top of the page. And I'll speak to Franconia Springfield a little more than I will the others, but you will quickly begin to see the repetition in the approach as we speak to these. And previously we had looked at a 3-track, 3 platform edges, as I mentioned, 2 platforms with existing overhead bridge between them, with a future lengthening up to 10 cars should we needed it. At the time, we had considered whether it was a tunnel or a bridge combination. This was the previous concept. And now, if you would, Robert, next slide. So now that it's a much simpler solution, if you will, because of this, we have 2 tracks on what would be the passenger half of the corridor, the 2 tracks on the west side of the corridor at this point. To that, all we have to do is lengthen the west platform, which is there today, and then lengthen the east platform. We had previously considered converting the east platform, or platform 1, into a center platform. That is no longer required because there would not be a platform edge on what is the freight side of the corridor. Paramount to this one is the addition of a pedestrian undergrade coming from Berry Road, so we can maintain connectivity to that neighborhood where many passengers come from to access it. So it's now, instead of 3 tracks, it's 2 tracks, 2 platform edges, lengthening, and the tunnel to move through this facility. Next slide, please, Robert. So moving south, again, I will start on the north end at Franconia Springfield and move south along the corridor. This is a rendering of the proposed structure, some flyover or bypass, generally referred to as the bypass. This is where and how and where we would make the transition from the east side of the corridor, just north of Lorton, to the west side of the corridor, just south of Franconia. Be a 2-track bypass structure that gets us over and above. For those that may be familiar, it's analogous to the Inglewood flyover for the CREATE project in Chicago. I think is a fine example of how this can be done and has been done in the past. So there's precedent for this type of maneuver. With that, Robert, next slide, please. So looking at Lorton, the good news at Lorton is that no work is really necessary. We completed construction in 2017 of a platform extension at Lorton. So this is showing the concept as we entered, and this was effectively late last year, where this is where we were. The previous concept was to add a pedestrian bridge, build a second center platform to have 3 platform edges. But now, next slide, please, Robert. But now you can see from the existing aerial photograph, we've lengthened the platform. We have full capacity for 8-car consist at this station and can operate like we've been doing for 27, almost, I guess, 28 years now, serving this location with full consist. So the state's planned construction, the CSX and state's planned construction doesn't impact. But in the future, for instance, when the 4th track were to be in place, we could simply convert this platform into a center platform, add pedestrian overhead, pedestrian access to that configuration, and move forward with a 2-edge platform structure. Next slide, please, Robert. Moving to Ripon. Ripon was one of the more complicated pieces in the previous iterations, where we had 3 tracks and 3 platform edges, as noted before. With a new overhead pedestrian bridge, giving us 2 access points. If those of you that know Ripon, it's kind of down in a hole, if you will. You have to come from grade down to the platform. We had considered, lengthening the platforms, adding the center platform, and making it longer for 10-car consist when needed. Now, if you would, Robert, slide 33. The concept is much simpler, and I will point out, whereas the other slides I'd refer to as a proposed concept, this is very much a future concept. The state's construction of the 3rd track, demonstrated here in the blue line, is, it's a 2030, I believe, delivery. Mr. McLaughlin can correct me if I'm wrong there, but in the phased delivery. And so once that 3rd track comes, that basically has no impact on our operations. We can do what we need to do at Ripon. So at Ripon, we've chosen to basically halt on this project, this future project, and operate like we are. Now we could do a platform extension similar to Lorton. We have plans to do some rehabilitation to the existing bridge where necessary. There's no major issues with the bridge, but it's starting to show its age. So we do some, state of good repair work on the bridge, and then be prepared to build a center platform and bridge structure when needed with the 4th track in the distant future. Next slide, please, Robert. So Potomac Shores, I know many of you are interested in Potomac Shores. It's not necessarily our project per se. We are working very closely with the developer that is building the head house, the parking garage, prescribed by their agreement with the county, as well as the station on the CSX corridor. This gives you a very nice rendering. I would offer that there's a few details that have changed since this rendering was created, but it gives a very good rendering. We have also taken into account, working with the developer, the state, CSX, about the planned third and future fourth track in this vicinity. And this station would provide for that as well, with an overhead pedestrian bridge to it. And similarly, in fact, it's very analogous to the Ripon station, where when the fourth track were to be constructed, it could be converted to a center platform and used in that fashion. Next slide, please, Robert. I'm very pleased to report that Quantico Station improvements, our solicitation for construction was issued last night. It was actually posted on eVirginia. We are very excited. We've spent the last couple of years working through design details and final design, close coordination with Marine Corps Base Quantico, CSX, Town of Quantico, Prince William County, and others, and have finally reached a point where we can deliver this project. So the IP was issued last night. Moving forward with that, we've solicited for construction management services. That RFP is open and being selected as we speak. We are moving forward with this one and very excited to be doing so. This is a rendering of the station as seen here, which takes into account both the third and future fourth track alignments within the which is we had to go back and do some redesign late last year to account for the potential of the third and the fourth track as prescribed by the agreement between the state and CSX. Next slide, please, Robert. Brook Station, previous concept, again, a little broken record here, but you get the idea of how we've progressed this, right? That it was 3 tracks, 3 platform edges with the center platform overhead, future 10-car trains potential. Now move to the next slide, please, Robert. And you can see that's a much simpler solution. In the short term, we will simply lengthen the platform to the south, add access, at-grade access, and then someday when the fourth track is to be built, again designated here in blue and red, the blue is the third track, which doesn't impact the station facility, and then the future fourth track shown in red. When that were to be constructed, we could convert this to a center platform and add an overhead pedestrian bridge to get to the facility. Next slide. Leland, very similar, 3 tracks, 3 platform edges previously, future lengthening. Next slide, please. So Leland, also very similar, analogous to the one for Brook I just showed you, where we would, again, the blue and the red are similarly, third track, fourth track, respectively. So we would lengthen this platform, not make it a center platform, not convert it, until which time it was needed with the future fourth track. Next slide, please. Fredericksburg, a little different. I would offer that we've been in this design and moving forward with parties here. We have a state of good repair project that would lengthen or repair, I guess I should say, rehabilitate the existing southernmost 120, 125 feet of platform, both on the east side and west side of the corridor, adding a new stairway from one end of the south platform where our parking is predominantly, behind the GWRC building there and the FAMPO building in Fredericksburg. And so this would tie all that together and would be the southernmost of these projects to be considered. Robert, next slide, please. So with that, I'll offer the benefits, the major benefits, going back to that interoperability amongst the 3 and future 4 tracks. It increases overall capacity and reliability. It gives us that almost infinite relief valve to get out and around to our facilities as need be. Secondly, it increases rail system capacity. Will give VRE and the Commonwealth the ability to increase commuter rail service. That is cannot be overstated in the idea that we lose the constraint of the number of trains per day. And then finally, it will no disruption to our current operations. Basically, we intend to construct these facilities as planned under normal conditions, operating conditions, normal without slow orders. It will be difficult, we'll say, challenging, but it is a challenge we're up to and working closely with CSX to do so. And probably the biggest part of this, and then I'll pass the baton to Mark, which is decrease in our VRE capital cost. You can see that the changes we're looking at significantly reduce the infrastructure required, which goes back to that Venn diagram we talked about in the beginning. What infrastructure is required in the short term? What infrastructure is required in the long term? This, if you're not building 6 pedestrian bridges for center platforms, you significantly reduce the capital outlay in the beginning. But that to say, we're not precluding anything. Our design actually considers the location of said pedestrian bridge and doesn't preclude its construction later. So therefore, not a lot of throwaway, if you will, to the future construction. With that, I'll pass it to Mark. And if you want to add any thoughts to anything I've offered?
Thank you, Dallas, and good morning to the operations board members. I hope that everyone can hear me. What I hope was clear as Dallas went through those projects was that as a result of the new transforming rail program and particularly the new the operating plan to separate the passenger and the freight service. So, of all of our projects, many of them have gotten smaller. At least one of them has gone away entirely, and none of the projects have gotten bigger. So we have a lot of flexibility now on the funding side that we didn't have previously. So even before the pandemic, we had started the process of looking at those funding sources across all of the projects to determine 2 things. One, whether there were certain grants or funding agreements that we needed to withdraw from, and then 2, whether the funding could be reallocated or reprogrammed among those existing projects in a more advantageous way. And then, of course, this effort took on even greater importance once the pandemic did arrive and the funding projections that we had all been relying on took a hit. And so we have been working very closely with DRPT and their team to look at the options for reallocating or reprogramming those funds. I want to highlight 2 projects in particular and then just talk a little more generally about the rest of the projects. As I think Dallas made clear, our planned project for Lorton is essentially going away entirely, and our planned project at Ripon is being reduced and sort of deprioritized or sort of pushed out into the future. Both of those projects have significant funding from the NBTA. As Rich noted in his email last week, we've been in close coordination with the NBTA and their staff about the changes. And with the deadline for finalizing the update to the 6-year plan and choosing the new projects to go into the 6-year plan, we concurred with their recommendation that the remaining funds on both of those 2 projects should be withdrawn. That will allow those funds to go back into the pot for allocation to other key congestion reduction projects in the region. And then more generally, our projects are funded by a wide mix of sources in addition to the NBTA. We have the REF and the IPROC monies. We have the Smart Scale funding for our Fredericksburg line capacity expansion. We have CMAQ money that's been allocated in conjunction with the local jurisdictions, a very broad range. So our step 1 really has been to determine what needed to happen with the NBTA money, given the timeline or the sort of calendar issues there. Step 2 then has been to see whether the potential is there for REF and IPROC monies to get freed up to be used on other key projects in the transforming rail program, while still ensuring that our key station projects keep moving ahead and remain fully funded. In some cases, it looks like there can be sort of a straightforward deobligation of money back to DRPT. In other cases, it looks like Smart Scale money may be able to be moved around and help to achieve those same projects in a more sort of advantageous way. And I want to be clear. Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you to very quickly either end it, and what I would like, I know this is very important, but we could continue this at the next meeting with a little bit more detailed or go over it again, but we are on a schedule today because we're restrained. We have the CEO search committee after this, and I'd like to keep this on schedule. So if you would not mind, we can continue this. Go ahead,
No problem. I will wrap it up by saying, we expect to bring to the board a formal resolution of withdrawal from those Lorton and Ripon projects next month. Depending on how our other discussions go with the state, we may have some other recommendations to bring to the board as well.
Mr. Chair.
There you go.
Yes, go ahead.
If I can, I'd just like to echo what Mark said. We've been working closely with Rich, Mark, Dallas, and others. And we would like to see some of these funds reappropriated to some other projects, especially the 3.7 billion Transforming Rail Virginia deal that's going to bring 75% of service. So that's something we can talk about.
Very important. Thank you. And yes, Matt.
I'm not going to ask for an answer right now. I just, for the next meeting and this discussion is, every time we've talked about expansion of rail and everything else over the years, now gone back from 10 to 2, we've got 2 choke point issues. Long Bridge we're taking care of. The second one that was always bedeviled us is storage. If Amtrak wanted to expand service, we're going to be expanding services. What's the storage picture going to be moving this project forward? So if we can have a presentation, my guess is we have enough to deal with in the south. We've always had issues dealing with storage in the north. I'm just interested in how we're going to deal with that issue.
I didn't see that presentation in my notes anywhere, so that could be sent to us in the future. I prefer to get presentations ahead of time so I can make notes as people are going.
Thank you, sir. We will do that.
Sure. I'll just want to be very brief and share on the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. I have been advocating, consistent with Mr. Schofield's comments, that the funding that NVTA would have allocated in this 6-year plan update to those 2 projects that have been withdrawn instead be allocated to the Franconia bypass, which is, I thought you were going to say the other choke point, Matt, was on the actual rail, right, where the congestion of freight and passenger meet. So I suppose I would want to provide the opportunity for anyone on the VRE board that does not feel that way to please let me know, because I don't want to be speaking for the VRE board. I've tried to take care of it, speak for myself. But I think that is a project that obviously is going to be critical to realize the rest of the investments that we are making in the program. So again, I've been advocating that in our finance committee. I'll be advocating it at the program and policy committee tonight of NVTA. And so if any member of the operations board feels differently or would prefer I not take care to characterize those comments, not on behalf of the VRE operations board, I want to provide an opportunity for that.
At this time, I'd ask if there's any questions quickly so we can move on to board members' comments. If not, would you call the roll for board members' comments? Thank you.
Mr. Alcorn?
No comments.
Ms. Bailey?
No comments.
Mr. Banks?
No comments.
Bennett Parker? Bonke?
I'll defer.
Ms. Crystal?
No comment.
Ms. Franklin?
No comments.
Mr. Kelly?
No comments.
Ms. Lawson?
Pass.
Mr. McLaughlin? Ms. Shelton?
No comments.
Chairman Skinner?
No comments.
Mr. Stewart?
Pass.
Mr. Watkins?
No comment.
I want to thank everybody that's present. Thank you for your inputs. And at this time, I would like to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, Mr. Kelly. Thank you. Ms. Bennett Parker, call the roll, please.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Ms. Bailey?
Aye.
Mr. Banks?
Aye.
Ms. Bonke?
Aye.
Ms. Crystal?
Aye.
Ms. Franklin?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson? Aye. Mr. McLaughlin? Ms. Shelton?
Aye.
Chairman Skinner?
Before I get my thing, do we have any electronic comments?
We had one.
Could you read it, please? Sorry.
Let me, okay. Mr. Scheffler from Prince William County said, please consider updating the projects pages quarterly so public has latest information regarding each of these planned improvements. The Industry Day presentation has a lot newer information that's not available on the projects page.
Thank you very much. That was it.
And then I hadn't asked for Mr. Stork for adjournment. And Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you.
So the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Katie,
I'm
would you-
sorry, and Mr. Chairman, I believe I need to read us the closed session, executive, or the executive search committee as well. Which I think is perfectly appropriate when it's adjourned. So let me make that motion. Okay. So colleagues, pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, 2.23711A of the Code of Virginia, I move that the VRE Operational Board CEO Search Committee in a closed meeting
has left the meeting.